Even though the Doctor had changed his face, Doctor Who wouldn't undergo too many radical changes between Series 1 and Series 2. In fact, it mostly stuck with the same formula that had worked in 2005, including a historical episode featuring a famous face from the history books. Showrunner Russell T Davies was very impressed with Mark Gatiss' use of Charles Dickens in The Unquiet Dead, leading to Davies wanting historical characters in Doctor Who to become an annual event. Even as early as 2004, Davies had wanted to do a story featuring Queen Victoria, one of the most iconic and famous monarchs to ever rule. Charles Dickens had faced ghosts, a familiar concept as he had written about them. However, for Queen Victoria's adventure, Davies decided to involve werewolves? Because that makes sense? He also wanted to explore the origins of Torchwood, which would be the story arc of Series 2, and the focus of a spin-off of the same name. This all led to Tooth and Claw, which sees the Doctor, Rose and Queen Victoria team up to battle a werewolf from outer space. Sounds more like a 1960s B-movie, honestly. After a ridiculous cold open I'll talk about later, the Doctor and Rose arrive in Scotland with a great scene in the TARDIS. Their original destination is 1979 Sheffield to watch a terrible punk band, but in classic Doctor Who fashion they end up a century and a few hundred miles out, landing in 1879 Scotland. I think they dodged a bullet, honestly. I mean seriously, it's 1979. Blondie are at their peak, the Ramones had just released I Wanna Be Sedated, and Glenn Danzig and Bobby Steele of Misfits got into a fight with skinheads at a gig by the Jam. Why not go there? Much better than Ian Drury and the Blockheads. I'm disappointed in you, Doctor. But poor music choice aside, I always enjoy the TARDIS going slightly off course like this, throwing even the Doctor into the unknown. The pair are accosted by soldiers, and I like the humour of the Doctor pulling off a flawless natural accent, but Rose failing with her own cringeworthy attempt. It's a nice reference to David Tennant himself being Scottish, and the Doctor also calls himself James McCrimmon, which is a cute little nod to the best classic Who companion. Yeah, I said it, you can't tell me Jamie isn't the best. I just won't listen. We soon find out that Queen Victoria herself is there, who I think is a good step up from Charles Dickens in Series 1, upping the ante from the last celebrity historical rather than moving sideways or downgrading. Queen Victoria has a very strong presence in this episode, played by Pauline Collins. It's no easy feat to play one of England's most famous and well-known monarchs, but Collins does a brilliant job with a very nuanced performance. Queen Victoria feels real, grieving for her dead husband, but also staying defiant and strong. She also serves as an outside perspective of the Doctor and Rose's relationship, similar to characters like Adam in Series 1. We see how the Doctor and Rose have almost become numb to the deaths of the people around them, too focused on enjoying the adrenaline rush of it all. It's shown by the recurring gag of the Doctor and Rose trying to get Queen Victoria to say her iconic "I am not amused" line.
Say the line, Bart! That I am not amused.
Even though it's used for comedic effect, it shows the toxicity of the Doctor and Rose, because Rose literally brings it up straight after the captain of Queen Victoria's guard has sacrificed himself. Queen Victoria notices this attitude and rightly calls them out on it, formally banishing the Doctor from the British Empire after knighting him for saving her.
But I know that you consort with stars and magic and think it fun. But your world is steeped in terror.
I've seen some criticism of this decision, but it makes sense. The Doctor is dangerous, even if he doesn't intend it. He's surrounded by danger and enjoys it, so you can understand why she doesn't trust him, instead setting up Torchwood to protect Britain from the Doctor and other threats. It's good that Torchwood is directly set up early on, rather than just having another vague, recurring word story arc like Bad Wolf. It's a nice change to have it be more obviously telegraphed as a big deal early on. Torchwood House is the setting of Tooth and Claw, since Queen Victoria is forced to take a diversion through the Highlands due to a fallen tree on the train line. Obviously, it's implied that this was the work of the mind-boggling BBC-ident monks that have taken over the house. I don't like the monks, especially the cold open. Even though it's great cinematography, it just feels so out of place. especially because it's in the middle of Victorian Scotland and you have these colourful warrior monks flying around doing martial arts. It just creates a bit of a disconnect and it doesn't really make any sense. I do like the slow burn mystery to some extent, with the monks in charge of the house without our protagonist realising that there's something wrong until Rose finds a maid hiding and is captured by the bald boys of the Brethren, taken into the cellar where everyone else is being held hostage. While she's in there, the Doctor is given a crash course on exposition, because we're told all about the mystical werewolf and its monk servants, along with finding out that Prince Albert used to come to Torchwood House to talk about werewolves and build a big, fancy, useless telescope there. Because that's totally not going to be important later. Tooth and Claw just has so much exposition and setup. People talk way too much, and you can see the ending from miles away. Usually with a story like this, the acting, directing, and general atmosphere is enough to excuse the exposition. But it just doesn't work here. Instead it feels so slow and boring. I don't even really understand the villain's plan in this episode. The whole idea is for the werewolf to bite Queen Victoria and turn the royal family into werewolves to fast track the Industrial Revolution and turn it into a steampunk paradise, but they never really explain how or why that would happen. Also, the werewolf is revealed to have landed in 1540, so why didn't it just bite Queen Liz I at any point during her reign? The Spanish Armada would have really been screwed if that happened. Or hell, it could have gone wild and bit Mary Queen of Scots in the 1560s and really changed things up. My point is, why did it take so long for it to do anything? The Doctor suggests that only a single cell survived the crash and took generations to develop, but we're expressly told that this werewolf has been around doing its thing for 300 years. None of it makes sense, especially the ending. It turns out that Torchwood House was built as a trap for the werewolf, and that the Koh-i-Noor diamond was constantly recut in order to focus a telescope, which the Doctor uses to amplify moonlight onto the werewolf to destroy it. It makes no sense because it's far too specific and coincidental. Albert had no reason to know Victoria would ever visit Torchwood House, especially because he didn't tell her the plan, so the whole thing is just luck. Because what if Queen Victoria didn't have the diamond with her during this adventure? They'd all die. I remember reading somewhere that you can use coincidences to start a story, but you can't use coincidences to resolve one. And sure, Doctor Who has always relied on coincidences for both bookends of stories, but it's far too egregious here. It's utterly ridiculous, and it really damages my enjoyment of the episode, especially because the journey there isn't even worth it. Most of the episode is spent running away from the werewolf, who is rampaging through the house to try to get to Queen Victoria for a nibble. I do have to admit the werewolf itself looks pretty good, especially for 2006 standards. The production team had learned from Cassandra in The End of the World, knowing that they couldn't do too many CGI shots with the time and budget they had, so Russell T Davies made sure the werewolf wouldn't be on screen too much. This means it looks good when it is on screen, especially because Visual Effects Studio The Mill had previously made the werewolf in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, so they knew what to do and how to do it. But even though the monster looks good, I don't like how it's handled during the bulk of the episode. It's too overpowered, so Davies has to bend over backwards to write in reasons why the werewolf doesn't just tear through the house and kill everyone straight away. This means we get a bunch of pointless sacrifices that don't really save our protagonists any time. It even conveniently turns out that the walls are covered in mistletoe oil, keeping the werewolf from getting into the library, where our main cast get a little bit of an expositional break, before we eventually find out that the diamond is used to power the telescope to kill the werewolf, because who could have possibly seen that coming? As his second full outing as the Doctor, David Tennant puts in a really solid performance in this episode, dominating every scene with his charm and confidence. He's also able to effortlessly slide into a more serious and dramatic tone, such as the dinner scene where the Doctor shares grief with Queen Victoria. He bounces well off of everyone else in the story, showing great chemistry with Billie Piper, with both of them showing giddy excitement at meeting Queen Victoria, but also excitement about the werewolf, another adventure for them to enjoy, showing their relationship growing more toxic and dangerous. The episode does kind of struggle with too many characters, but I feel like it balances it well enough and you get a good understanding of everyone's personalities and motivations, although I didn't find myself feeling doing anything for any of the characters that die, which is most of them. Having a hugely important historical figure around gives the episode a boost, because it's that kind of gimmicky presence that sells the story. Having an episode of the Doctor and Rose battling a werewolf sounds fine, but when you make it the Doctor and Rose battling a werewolf with Queen Victoria, it adds a new layer and makes it more interesting and appetizing. One of the things I do like about Tooth and Claw is the ending, where the Doctor explains how Queen Victoria developed a rare blood condition that became hereditary in her children, jokingly hinting that she did actually get bitten, and that some of the royals are secretly werewolves. It's interesting because Queen Victoria really did develop an unexplained genetic blood condition that got passed down through the family. I like when Doctor Who offers explanations like these, giving a fantastical and exciting sci-fi explanation for a historical mystery. It's an idea that would later be used in the Shakespeare Code, with Love's Labour's 1, The Unicorn and the Wasp with Agatha Christie's disappearance, and Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror with strange lightning over Wardenclyffe Tower after it was shut down. It's a nice little touch that adds a lot to the story, sprinkling in these truths despite the ending being wildly outlandish and impossible, firing up your imagination and making you wonder, what if? I caught some flack in my New Earth video when I said I don't like Tooth and Claw, but I've just never really been able to enjoy it. I feel like the pacing is all off, since there are a lot of slow expositional scenes that aren't really interesting enough to justify their own existence. The performances are good, especially Tennant and Pauline Collins. The setting itself is interesting and the werewolf is well realised, but it all falls flat for me. I find it a really forgettable episode with a lot of missed potential. And no, I'm not just salty because it aired on my birthday. Like, happy birthday little Harbo, here's your present, the absolute worst episode of your favourite era of Doctor Who, written by your favourite writer of Doctor Who. Have fun with the endless disappointment. I know it's harsh of me, but I think I'd have to give it a really low D on the Series 2 tier list. Probably the lowest ranking episode of the Davies era. I know I've probably made it sound like the worst thing to ever happen to Doctor Who, but it's not hugely awful. There's enough there to enjoy it if you're forced to watch it, but I always find myself skipping it because it just feels like such a drag. It's like it has an identity crisis. It doesn't really know what it wants to be exactly, which brings it down. It's just a disappointing episode for me. The lowest point of Series 2, because even Fear Her is so bad it's good. So I guess you could say I am not amused.